First topic. Uh, in a Virginia elementary school, a 5-year-old was put in a chokehold by a school resource officer. The child had ADHD and was singing too loudly in Spanish class and wouldn't stop. Violence against children by police officers is nothing new, especially if they are black. Should officers ever be allowed in schools beyond responding to an extreme situation like a shooting? If so, are incidences like this one just an acceptable risk? If not, should teachers be expected to deal with non life threatening violence that can still lead to serious injuries? So, yeah, exactly as it sounds, not great. There was a 5-year-old gripped up by officers. Mother came and tried to put a stop to it. She was literally afraid for her life. She was black. Child was black. She was like, "What is this officer going to do to me when if I try to interfere, right? Like who knows?" So she was terrified, but she did step in. It's her little boy, so she's like, "This has got to be done." And it didn't seem like she was getting any support from the school administrators and all that. But so we can talk about that and a larger context of these officers in schools. All right, Top Dolphin, start us off.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't hate cops like a lot of people do. I think that um I'm not gonna like try to justify like this individual case of violence. There's so little information out there about this. But it does seem like possibly this like the cop was a little bit too aggressive with the kid. I think chokeholds are like pretty bad too. Um, so like that's not cool. But like the overarching concept, like absolutely, cops need to be in schools and like different different schools and have different needs for cops. And I think this shows like more need for like like larger systemic like police reform and stuff like that.
Okay, Sig Natural.
Man, this is so. First off, like, there's no reason why a grown ass man needs to put a 5-year-old in a chokehold. It's just no reason for it. It should just like a grown ass man or a 5-year-old choke. Like parents these days, they would do that at home, right? Then people would say call CPS. People would be like, "What the fuck's going on? What are you doing?" I don't know. There's no reason for like I know that kids can be bad, kids can be assholes, kids can yell and scream or something like that. There's no reason to put them in a chokehold. There's no reason for that. You can restrain them, sure. Choke them? The fuck? No, no reason. Um, but yeah, no. In terms of like, should police be in schools and everything? Growing up, I had police a lot in my school. Like, police just would just when we go outside. I saw that was where I saw a lot of police, like just police in black bodies, basically, just like police that would just like come up to him when they would litter and just be like, "Hey, pick that shit up" or whatever. I would see a lot of that shit, coming out against middle schools, high schools, and all that. A lot of police would just be like, slam 'em on, pick them up, slam them on the fucking door of the car and everything like that. That's where I saw a lot of that for the first time was when I was at school because like they would just believe that we couldn't take care of ourselves when we came out, and that may be true. That may be true, but like because we were kids, not because we're black, because we're kids. But um I don't think that should be a thing handled by the police, especially not with the system that we've got going on in this country. Okay, at any point in time, there's a way that we can have an alternative for this, especially when we're talking about children. Okay, and these were fucking 13, 14, 15 year olds. This is a fucking 5-year old, right? No reason for the cops to get involved.
Wiggling, jiggling.
I mean, I know what we're all thinking at first, right? Like, the kid's little, etc. But we got to really think a little deeper about this. What was the kid doing, right? Like, the cop had to have a reason. Like, that kid had to be doing something. And then you got to give them the benefit. And then when you learn, maybe they were singing. What were they singing? The article's NBC. Can you really trust NBC? Can you really trust the context of the situation? Beyond that, like, perhaps that kid, maybe they deserved it. Maybe they deserved what happened. Maybe you should, like, instead of just listening to what the media says and just taking some response, maybe, like, think a little deeper for yourself. No, but realistically, like a 5-year-old kid, like, first and foremost, like, why a chokehold? Like, of all the things, like, I think my senior year, they took some like 10th grade kid that was in the middle of a fight, and they restrained him, and then they dislocated his shoulder, and that was like the practice. And I remember we got into these intense like little kid like looking up lawyer stuff like fights and being like, "You're not allowed to do that. It's not allowed in New York State." And like they just dislocated the shoulder, etc. And then they got this little kid in a chokehold. Like it's like they didn't learn after like George Floyd. Like that's like maybe somewhere else, maybe like a leg hold or something. And then beyond that, it's just like why? And then you look at the case, and then you learn about like the school has, I guess, some problems with like the way they treat specific students, like students that have like that are like handy capable or like what is it, neuro divergent. Like they have problems with treating these kids. And you think it's kind of fucked up. Like it's pretty fucked up the way they're handling it. But also like the mom, uh, she kind of dramatic. I mean, like she said some shit that was really dramatic. She was like, "Will I also be shot dead trying to save my son?" Like, you're not gonna be shot dead in a school trying to like save your son because once you're in the school, you're a parent, and there's nothing schools scared of more than like parents. Like you're like extra protected. Like your skin and everything wipes away, and you're a parent. But I also think like overall like yeah, it's pretty fucked up. And I think she should get her bag. Like, if she's really trying to go for like office, she's trying to be like on the board of education or something, good for her. But if there's a bag there, I think she should reach out and grab that because that could help her a lot.
Yeah. Interesting conclusions there, Wiggle. Let's examine that later. Let's go to GSU Gambit first.
Yeah, so Wiggle says some very true things. This person appears to be quite hyperbolic. They talked about like their daughter and she was drugged in the class just because her shoes are outside. It sounds like she's not good at raising her kids. Now that doesn't excuse the police officer in this case. I think that like chokehold may be too much. I mean, it depends on the situation, but I'm always for like restraint, but chokehold can definitely be too much. But I don't even understand what really happened here. Like because it may not have even been a chokehold applied with how hyperbolic she is, but I guess we'll talk more in the open. But yeah, generally I think school resource officers are good. If you're from the hood, you know that they're like absolutely pertinent and like they do things to help people and save people lives. There was apparently a fight at my school today or yesterday one, and they canceled homecoming. So like these things are important. We understand school resource officers are good in certain situations.
Okay, all right. Chris Cosmo, we might have a fight here.
Yeah, there's no like I saw the picture of the kid. It's a 5-year-old, it's a grown ass man. I'd never like there's no reason to chokehold. Like you put him in a chokehold. Like you couldn't describe me any situation where that's necessary at all. I've like resource officers, I agree with Gambit. They're good. My resource officers that I had growing up through schools, they weren't armed and they'd only like intervene through in like certain really serious situations. Like, and it was in high school I remember them the most. In elementary school, I don't remember like resource officers being there. And we had neurodivergent kids and things like that in schools. Some of them would have like fits and they would get upset. They would just remove them from class. They didn't have to restrain them all that much. They just stand them up because they get agitated and didn't want to be there, so they removed them from the situation. It was quite easy to do because they didn't want to be there in the first place, right? So they removed them from class. They put them in a separate room. They had like have like someone goes speak to them, or they have the parent come in. I don't remember this like being so like why do they feel the need to get so violent? I can understand if you're dealing with bigger kids in the case of high school where these like some of these like dudes that I went to high school with, like grown ass men, right? And when when two of these people are fighting each other, I can understand there needs to be some physical restraint involved, right? Or things could like get really bad. It's just the level that they're going to. I don't remember this having to be a thing so like often, right? Like you having to like handcuff kids, like slamming them to the ground, chokehold, doing all these things. About it, like it seems like completely ridiculous to me, and it just seems like some of these people are just doing that out of spite. I think they just didn't like the kid, and he just did that because like he was annoyed and he didn't like what the kid was doing.
Okay, let's go to Wake the Beast.
I can only think of 2 occasions in which I would use a chokehold on another person, and this would be either to get a submission win or to kill that man.
Okay.
However, when I think about men, I think there are far better uses of our strength. When you think about the strength of men, We exist to protect things that are fragile. I mean, you can say what you want about the decisions that men have made throughout your history, but without their power, there would be no beautiful women. You would have died out long before you had a chance to flower and blossom. And the vulnerability of children would also be at risk because without a man there to stand as a threat of reciprocal violence against other threats, your child cannot be vulnerable. So the safest place for a child is inside of a family with both parents. But unfortunately, when we think about our Black boys, they are underserved in this category. In 1990, the rate at which Black children were born out of wedlock outside of this fundamental safety net was 63%. That's unacceptable. In 2016, it became 69%. This is an extinction level event. If we are in agreement that having a father in your life is important, exactly how long are we expecting Black boys to exist in this world and have a viable chance at success when they are running the race with one leg and both hands behind their back? So what does this mean for us? It means that as defenders of our community, we exist there as a buffer between those who would threaten our children. And until we do that, men, especially police officers, have no reason to fear putting hands on a Black child. I mean, what are you going to do? Go home and tell your father? I mean, even if you have one, he's probably a convicted felon or one of the 33% of Black men in America who have a felony who can't even purchase a firearm to defend you with. And this is exactly where Black men need to step up and be better stewards of their children.
Based. Wait the based.
Oh man, this is this is gonna be a day. All right, Fanatic, you're up next.
Whew. This is gonna be a good one. Listen, I think what the idea about whether or not police officers should be in a school, period. I don't really think that I've seen that police officers really do contribute to making the school more safe. I think we have things like school psychologists and people like that to deal with these sort of situations, such as unruly children. Like, like I think most schools are required to have a school psychologist on board. You have security guard, but an actual police officer seems pretty ridiculous. We know what police guards are trained to do. They're not trained to work with children. And in almost every field, we have some sort of distinction for children versus adults. With the court system, we have child court versus adult court. For psychologists, we have child psychologists and we have adult psychologists. They require different education. For educators, we normally have adult educators and children educators. You can go to school and get a master's degree in early education or adult education. These things are different. Pediatrics, we have like pediatricians who are designed specifically to treat children versus other doctors who are going to specialize for adults. So the idea that we would have an officer, a police officer working with children and putting them in chokeholds, chokeholds shouldn't be used regardless. I believe within the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a nationwide ban on chokeholds, federal. So and the withholding of funding to all the other states that don't comply with this. So we obviously recognize already a need to get rid of chokeholds. Why would you need that on a child? It's absolutely reprehensible. I understand that this mother, I don't think that this mother is hyperbolic. I think when interacting with police officers, especially when a police officer seems like he's intent on finishing his, inflicting of harm, I think that they can be really hyper reactive. And we've seen so many different cases in which they start trying to arrest like other people who are unrelated and things like that. I think it's a warranted harm, probably due to all of the trauma that that woman has experienced watching all of these random Black people being killed and brutalized by police officers. I think it's fair. I don't think she's hyperbolic. I think we probably don't need police officers in schools, but I'm willing for someone to show me some sort of data that shows that police officers in school create such a benefit that outweighs all of the negative harm from there.
Next, we have Jay, who is back with us. I'm very happy to see her once again for a second time. Jay, you can introduce yourself and then introduce your feelings on this topic.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I got caught up by a drawbridge. An actual drawbridge took 15 minutes.
You're a little quiet. A little quiet.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Yeah. I. Sorry, I'm late. I'm Jay. I do cooking streams, and I just built a PC a few months ago, so now I'm starting to do game streams. You can catch me at jcooksnada on Twitch. You can also follow me on Twitter, and yeah, I'm excited about these two topics. I think we're starting with topic one, so I'll just dive into my opinion. I think I agreed with who had said it. Someone had said, I think it was Wiggle, who had said that she didn't seem that. I don't know. To me, I mean, obviously, I think that officers shouldn't be in schools. And Wiggle, to your point, it seemed that like she didn't care until something had happened to her son, which is, I mean, more power to you. Like she did take a lot of action, but that's also the sentiment that I got from the article. Um, I I feel like this is not. I don't feel like it's not acceptable. We hear instances of this like all of the time, especially towards Black students and other students of color, and it goes to show that it's more than just the training that these officers get. It's like how it's almost like they're all built the same, in a way. Uh, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay.
I feel like I'm missing a point though.
Well, we'll have time to get back to it. But
Okay.
yeah, all right, let's jump into it then.
Nobody wants to start.
I don't know. It's just for me, it seems like super clear. Like there's no reason for this dude to do this. If we're going to talk about officers in school, I can definitely see like some issues coming up with that. I can see why you wouldn't want that there to be that. I mean, if we're talking about armed officers, for me in my case, I don't have experience dealing with that. All like resource officers I dealt with like were unarmed and they were relatively just like in places they had never really said much of anything, and they were only like they only did things when they were called to do something. Like I never had a problem with the resource officers that I had in school, but that can be totally different depending on where you are, and if like you're threatened by these people who are armed, right? They're very authoritative. They're like constantly like all around keeping track of kids and things like that. And when situations go down, they're aggressive in handling these kids. I can see where this can be a problem. Um, but I don't have much experience with that. I'd say that's bad, period. But I can see in some cases where it's needed. Like I said, I went to school with grown like people who like look like grown men, white, Black, Hispanic. Like the people on the varsity football team, like were gigantic, and when they got into fights, it was a dangerous situation. And I can see where those officers are needed. Teachers can't just like talk those kids down, right? And I wouldn't want the police to be called in to like the regular police to be called in with guns and things like that. And during a situation like that, and somebody could get seriously hurt, those types of officers there who knew how to restrain the kids, who knew how to stop these situations from happening, and like settle things down, I'm okay with that.
When I was in the 5th grade, I went through the DARE program. And during the DARE program, we would have an officer who was typically on campus who would come and speak to us about drugs and drug violence. But it never crossed the line. And I can only imagine how I would have felt at 10 years of age watching this grown man put his arms around a child's neck. This would have been beyond reprehensible. But there was a difference back then. These men who policed my school, and there was even another police officer who policed my neighborhood, they were a part of the community. They lived there. They knew us by our names, they knew our families, and they had a reasonable idea of where we lived. What is the reality of policing today? We no longer have this connection with our public servants. How many police officers know you by name? At the end of your police officer's shift in your neighborhood, does he come by your door and knock on it and ask you if you need anything before he signs off? Probably not. We live in a gazelle shaft. And in a gazelle shaft, we are fundamentally disconnected from each other. And it's that connection that enables the level of empathy needed to police effectively. And so until we reestablish some sort of communal level empathy, policing is doomed, not just in schools, but everywhere.
I would say Beast. Like I think that's a lot hard. I don't know if you grew up in like a smaller sort of town or something, but like in a city type scenario, I mean, it's nearly impossible to get that sort of community that you're trying to say, right? Like in an inner city where a lot of black people are, a good number of us are, like that's generally what I'm kind of coming from that sort of background. It's just like, hey, the officer most likely is not going to know your name because they're not going to live in a small town near you. They probably live in the burbs somewhere, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. We all made a decision long ago that we would rather live in crowded cities and metropolises. This came at an
Oh,
expense, and that expense was
well,
being separated. Now the cows have come home.
well,
You
Beast, I
went
feel like
hungry?
that's
Well,
a
I'm a
well,
person
hold on,
that
hold
grew
Beast,
up in
Beast,
a.
yeah, that feels like a very big generalization to describe the Great Migrations, right? Like they did that for work, right? It was just oh, we just made our decision, we made our bed, now we got to sleep. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. I would
Certainly, there are
say
reasons
to
why
why black
people
people are in
leave.
cities.
Certainly, there are reasons that people leave rural life, and one of them you just mentioned. I think that's the primary reason, to be in greater proximity to resources. But this came with a cost, and that cost was not knowing the people you share your town with. So when we go to the grocery store, the lady who's doing my groceries, who's scanning them, I don't know her name. I know nothing about her. If something were to go down, the police officer who's going to come to resolve the difference knows nothing about anyone there. So where is there an opportunity for empathy? I guess you could say you could train that into officers. But how exactly do you train a person to care about people they are disconnected from?
I don't
This
think
idea that you don't know the
so.
people.
If we really look at something, I'm not in a city. I'm not in some place that's rural. I think I'm more in like a suburb kind of area. And I think even in suburbs that there's a pretty big disconnect, and most officers aren't going to know your name, and things like that. High schools can be pretty large, even in suburbs. And so then I don't know how a safety officer is going to really be able to really know like 3,000 students. Like for instance, that was like about how many students were at my high school. I think it's kind of unrealistic. Same with the town. I mean, same with the grocers and all of those things. You do have like extremely rural small towns in which people are going to know each other more, but I think that doesn't apply to like the vast majority of the country. The vast majority of the country lives in cities and suburbs. So I think it's almost impossible to kind of like operate with that framework. I think the suburbs are like pretty much the dream for like most Americans because resources are more able to be accessed in the suburbs, of course, and so I think that's more attractive than rural living. But I will say, regarding the officers inside of these schools, there is no data that really suggests that they make them safe. In fact, there was such a dramatic increase in these officers in schools that like were directly related to Columbine, which I believe was in like '97. That was my freshman year in high school. I'm an old man. As a result of that, we started adding all these officers in school, but it doesn't seem like they actually contribute anything. In fact, one of the most famous one, the Parkland shooting, the officer stayed outside in like a defensive position as the shooting took place in which people were killed. So it seems like these officers really aren't equipped to handle these situations. There's no evidence that suggests that they're making it safer, but there are all of these unintended consequences that, like, such as children being more likely to be expelled, suspended, and arrested, charged when there's a safety officer at a school. So we're trading in this prison to pipeline situation. What is it? What is it? Suspension to prison pipeline, whatever. Like we're trading that in for supposedly safer schools, which no data suggests and no history ever suggests is actually being done. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't see why we have them there. We've survived for the vast majority of the time without them. I don't know why we need them.
I guess I have a misconception about resource officers. Like the ones I had in my school were like glorified security guards. So they couldn't arrest
No,
anyone.
no.
Right.
Hey, we
An
had
SRO, an
you
SRO is
can.
not a security guard. An SRO is an actual police officer. They're
Yeah.
trained police officers. That's what SROs are.
Yeah.
But Chris, we had those too. We had it all. There was like there was the SROs, there was the half-ass security guards that would basically just be like, "Hey, stop that!" when people were just like stabbing each other, and there was just like the actual police officers that were like outside in the parking lot waiting for when we walked home, just
Yeah.
just
So
in
I had
case,
that too.
that were
Like
just always there.
all their
Yeah.
buses would line up and there'd be cops outside. I think they were mainly there because like a couple of kids would get got hit by buses like a lot, like because they didn't walk across the street properly. So like parents were upset about that. The cops were just making sure kids walked across the street properly. They didn't really watch
What the
them
fuck
walk.
are the crossing guards?
Re-
That's what the crossing guards are for.
I don't remember crossing guards being there, honestly. But like,
Really? Wow, that's crazy.
yeah, that is crazy now that you say it. But yeah, the what I thought them was resource officers. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they're stepped down at my school. It's because they weren't arresting anybody. And whenever something like whenever they do random searches, they have real cops come in. They do the searches. And if they found some like a weapon or something in a kid's locker or on a kid, the cops would be the ones to like take that kid out of the school. Like the resource officers didn't really handle that. They help you get in the
Sure.
locker.
Yeah, so you had a security guard. You didn't actually have SROs in your school, but there is a
Okay.
very big difference. I remember I had a SRO, and someone accused me of stealing. Someone behind me actually stole. I just wasn't going snitch. And so when they accosted the girl for like, hey, like you stole something, she said, no, I passed it back, and I was directly behind her. So then they assumed that I stole something. I wasn't a stealing person. I would convince my friends to steal for me. So I hadn't stolen anything, and they literally insisted that I had stolen something, and like brought me in front of this police officer who was telling me that he could give me a ticket, he could search my property. I'm like, you can't search my property. You don't have a legal right to do that. Turns out, when you're on school grounds, they do have a legal right to search your property. He threatened me with tickets and things like that, and I just copped the most Negroidian attitude of all time. You ain't giving me no ticket. I didn't do anything wrong. You have no evidence I did anything wrong. Give me my ticket then. I'm waiting for my ticket. You're impeding on my education. Yada, yada, yada. He was like, I don't need this attitude, blah, blah, blah. He didn't give me no ticket, but they forever branded me as a thief for that, even though I hadn't stolen anything. All that police officer did was just like further incriminate me. And I think that was gross. I don't think that they really achieve anything. I don't think that they really do anything productive. If anyone has any data that says that they do something productive, I'd like to see it, because we obviously recognize that the expulsions and these other unintended consequences are there, and in which SROs are there. So it seems like we can point to something negative, and I'm not aware of any data that there's something positive. Now I can't prove like the absence of data, but does anybody here know of anything that suggests that they actually do good?
Yes. So in my school district, like you couldn't wear hats. There's always different like reasons why. I think the best one, the one that I thought was the most likely, is like something about like Columbine and like and then further violence in schools, and the idea that it would lead to gang-related violence, as you could see kids wearing the same thing, and then they would congregate or something. But whatever the reason, like I went to a pretty white school, and people like sports, and they'd take everybody's hats. And the most that these security guards did was just take people's hats. You'd be like in the middle of detention and or ISS, and you'd find like the person next to you. They're only there because they wore a hat, and it made the system look so stupid. But the benefit of this was some of these people were Knicks fans, and I thought that was a great utility.
They do suck, but yes.
That's some
But
great
like,
statistics, Michael. I love it.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I want to go on that point because also then the purpose of it's actually an adverse effect. Not only is it not only are they not helpful, but it's an adverse effect that they're having. Fanatic, you brought up a good point about like student rights. Like if a student is assaulted by a police officer, then what right do they have? I guess this parent sued, but what other rights do students have to sue?
Yeah, and I would
Because
say that we already have like lots of problems associated with like qualified immunity and officers being able to do atrocious things with complete like impunity, and then now we're going to start extending those sort of things towards our children. Furthermore, we could probably use those resources for things like school psychologists and like after school programs and social workers. Like why would we waste money on these officers that have adverse effects? Thank you for that. That have adverse effects that aren't really providing a benefit, when we could literally do these other things, which we know will have better resources, or better usage of resources with all of these benefits. It just seems like there's no need for it. And I can't imagine a parent that would witness their kid in a chokehold, especially one whose other child had already experienced some disciplinary actions in which they were literally dragged and their shoes were left behind. It seems like I would probably be a little bit hyper vigilant as well. I don't know, man. It just seems like an atrocious thing. And these aren't the only ones. Remember that other officer who arrested that little girl? She was 7 years old. It
In the
sounds
car.
atrocious. These things are really, really bad. What the freak are we doing? Like, I'm all for entertaining conversations with adults that want to discuss like the role of policing on adults. But when we start going to children, it seems like all bets should be freaking off. What the hell are we doing to consider letting officers extend problems to our freaking kids in school? This is insane.
Fanatic, you reminded me of that case there. That happened a long time ago. Where the officer, there was a camera of it, and she was like, she was being a little shit or whatever. But then the officer fucking held her on the ground, did all the shit and all that stuff. I was around her age. I always remember that because I saw that on the news. My grandparents were having a fit, and I was like, man, if that ever happened to fucking you, man.
Bro, how young are you? What the
Going on?
freak?
Yeah, that was like a year ago. like
A
that-
year
that-
ago? Oh, then
Yeah,
we're
that
referencing
was-
something
that
else
was
It was like
less than
entirely
a
nearly
year.
different.
7 months or some shit.
It happened multiple
Oh, then-
times throughout.
In that
Was
case,
another one when
we're
you
talking
were a
about a
kid?
completely different case. Because there's one that happened on the news. I think it might have been local news in Philadelphia when I was a child.
Oh.
Okay,
Jeez.
when I was that age, and I remember seeing footage of it because there was footage of her doing this. Okay, it was definitely not some shit last year.
It's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty
So, there's,
fucked
so,
up.
so isn't that crazy
Hold
that
on.
it happened in your childhood and now we have another one happening like here and then now we have this case right here with a 5-year-old in a choke? Like there's something sick about this. We can't, like that's why I'm like hoping if we don't have any answers as to why this should happen, I guess we should probably be able to agree unequivocally on this panel that this is something that should never happen. We should be able to just say is absolutely not okay.
It's pretty
Yeah, so
crazy because
wait,
So, interesting question. Have any of you, I know Fanatic spoke to his experience. Have any of you guys had like interactions with like a school resource officer,
yeah,
school
so, yeah,
security
that's
officer?
Yeah, I think
Alright.
what Wake said is very true. So I'm from a rural area, and we had relatively very positive interactions with our school resource officer. And like my community is a bit different, so maybe there are certain extenuating circumstances that make it more necessary than other communities. Like I think I was telling y'all about this on a panel like a month ago on All Black Everything. We had a 14 and a 13-year-old commit a drive-by shooting on some other teenagers. Like there are certain parts of our and the city that I'm from isn't even the worst of like the places that are near me. So these things are very important in certain cases, and it's possible that the policy is overused and it's in schools that shouldn't necessarily have those things. But I also think what Wake said is important. I think that the lack of empathy that we see sometimes is due to people not understanding each other. Our school resource officer knew your parents' name. So they would be like, hey, like, yo, I'm gonna call so and so if you keep acting stupid. Right. And like even the staff of the school, blah, blah, blah. So there was a bunch of things in the community to make empathy easier. And we had a white school resource officer, not even a black. It was 99% black school, white resource officer. There was only one case I think where people said that maybe they felt like he like overstepped himself. But like yeah, I think he was a net positive to our community. I think that there's a lot of communities near my community, and most of the graduates would probably say the same thing. There was all type of gang violence. There were kids that were getting jumped because they were from certain cities or they weren't a part of XYZ gang. So I think in certain places in our country, school resource officers are a complete positive, and removal of them would be really, really bad.
Yeah, so I actually posted a study in the chat. What it seems to say is that school resource officers being present leads to about a 3.5% increase in not necessarily like violence, but like people being charged with crimes for things that happen in schools. Which could be, right, to be very clear, it could be just because the places where school resource officers are necessary are more likely to have things that need to be escalated. But it seems to be like maybe like there's some and I don't personally think school resource officers like in and of themselves are bad, but it seems to be like there's some procedural thing that whenever a school resource officer gets involved, that the solution to this is like people need to be charged with crimes, people need to go down to the police station. Um, and personally, I've had two really discrete interactions with like violence in school, where like a adult had to be involved, and one was I got into a fight in sixth grade. No, I got into a fight in seventh grade in which the officer had to remove the other kid off my face because he was like punching me in the face too much. And the other one was in third grade actually, where I this is gonna sound really bad. It's not as bad as it sounds, but I like hit a teacher, and but in that case we didn't have a resource officer around, and it was up to like a male teacher to be in charge of to like removing me from the situation. Not that I was like violent against the teacher, but like obviously if a teacher gets hit, like people take that really seriously. Um, and I lost my fucking mind. I don't know what happened. But I think that like personally for me, I think school resource officers can be like really really helpful, and um they can have like a really important role, especially if they take more of an active role in like the safety of the school. Like if they're doing things like dare, if they're doing things like we had a school resource officer like consult on a like a we had a class called street law. um like there's a lot of things that resource officers can maybe do, and maybe like procedural things we can change so that like the goal isn't like whenever a police resource officer gets involved, it's to like take kids off and charge them with crimes and demonize them. But we have to recognize that in a lot of schools there's like violence is like really really scary, and if it's not resource officers who have to be like in charge of like violence, then it falls onto like teachers, and like I don't know if that's like necessarily a better solution, because
Well, sure.
because like you talk about like the kid getting dragged and their shoes getting left behind. Like I don't know about you guys, but I've seen teachers do literally this to kids, and a lot of times a lot worse. And so just because like resource officers do these things doesn't mean that the alternative solution to get rid of like violent acting kids and stuff like that would produce like better results. Maybe
Well,
they
the
would get like
opposite,
prosecuted less, but like that doesn't mean like the situations are handled better.
the opposite also happens. Like there are situations where people have aggressed on teachers and things like that. And like I think what you said is so good. Like in a lot of the schools near where I'm from, there's not a lot of like even male teachers available. Like I had my first male teacher, what, like ninth grade, maybe?
Damn.
I can't remember. Probably ninth grade, I think. So like, not only is there and our community struggle with fatherlessness, pointing out some of the stuff that Wake the Beast said. So a lot of people had behavioral issues, and like in some schools, it's just not this cookie cutter situation, and having like people understanding that, oh yeah, the resource officers here. Like you could see the mind shift in people as students when we first got our first resource officer. So I think it's in certain situations is necessary. I
So
wouldn't even
So
say
my
good. I say
my problem
can
with,
I say?
go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, well,
No, you could.
all right. So my problem is basically we're topped off and was leading to there at the end, saying that these officers, right, like they understand people as criminals. This is what we teach them, right? Like there is a problem, you don't comply, then use force. Like we see it all the time, and we see them lie, right? So I don't know how many videos we have to see of an officer gripping up some kids, slamming them to the floor, right? And maybe putting them in some brutal hold for like a behavioral issue, right? Not even a violent one oftentimes, just I kind of felt like it, right? And then after that, in the report, because they're like, oh yeah, I wasn't being recorded, so it's cool, right? They'll fucking lie about it. They'll lie about what happened. We've seen it time and time again. It happens outside of school, so we know what happens inside of school, and we have it documented inside of school as well, right? So I am not gung ho about having these people in there, right? And especially since it's not like one that kids can't get violent in all schools, but they don't happen in they don't have them in all schools. Somehow they manage. So like, look, I'm not saying that a a situation can't come up where an officer is required. Absolutely, these things get fucking crazy. Shit gets wild. But if you have them there at just, I think part of it is the ease of access, right? The teacher can say, well, I don't want to deal with this, right? This kid is too much for me to handle. I'm just going to call an officer in. And when you do that, armed or not, there's going to be a certain level of response that's going to come down, unless the dude is particularly well trained. And especially, and we know this happens with minority kids, right? This is more likely to happen to minority kids. And when they are punished, the punishment is greater, right? Like it escalates with your dark skin, right? For the exact same thing. When it becomes suspended or anything, right? Like officers will just fucking use more force against us. So no, I don't.
So part of your question
Can't-
was,
I
if
can't
so,
find
are incidences like this one just an acceptable risk? I think it's just like having police outside of schools, right? If police are present, there's the possibility of bad things happening. If police aren't present, there's still the possibility of bad things happening. And I think that, yeah, it sucks. We don't want police to abuse kids. Like, that's like probably the most disgusting thing a police officer can do. But we know that in certain situations where violence is high in the atmosphere, then these things are going to be needed, and it is an acceptable risk in those cases.
Let's go
So
to
Dolphin,
Wiggle.
really quick.
Okay, let's go to Wiggle, Fanatic, Jay, and then Chris.
I think a missing perspective largely is like the school officials and like parents. The officer did this, but the officer had probably done this before and done this and gotten accustomed to being able to do this. And I think the parents' biggest problem is like the school officials just being okay with this behavior, just not really caring. I think I noticed this most with like all the CRT stuff that went around a few months and is still going around. It feels like school officials seem so disconnected from parents and such, and like what goes around. It's almost like they want to have your kids in a space and deal with your kids and just not have to deal with this like antagonizing force, which is the parents. And it's kind of like it's pretty fucked up. I think of it in the sense of like you guys are describing this thing of like parents wouldn't really want this. In my school district, we had parents. I think it was like after Sandy Hook and during the Board of Education meeting. I had to go to these Board of Education meetings. We had like a 9/11 first responder father come in and give like a speech about how like the schools weren't secure enough. People could just walk into these schools. How good is the security? Like I have a daughter at one of these schools, etc. And then the superintendent rolled their eyes at him. And this is the kind of like behavior some of these superintendents and such have. They infight with each other. They seem like they live on like this upper pedestal, this upper class pedestal, even above the teachers themselves. And yes, you may have individual teachers that feel like they care about students, but there's this overarching system where there's people at the top that seem like they're okay with these things happening as long as it's business as usual and you're pumping out kids every year. There's new kids, there's new problems, and as long as we can disconnect the parents as much as possible and give them the perceived truth of yeah, we're taking care of your kids, etc. It seems like that's what they're looking for. I think like a good example, like just thinking about, is like parents themselves, not example, but like parents themselves, they're entrusting the school with their children. They're entrusting you with their children. And this is like, it was like what Sig Natural said earlier, and then the article it said itself. Like CPS would think this is a problem. But like the school has this extra shield that allows them to have these things take place and without parents knowing. And then once parents know, then it's a problem. And then what happens is parents complain, and then the school always has some reasonings around it. And there's like a self-defense mechanism. And we have to see why. Does the school react this way? Why do school officials act this way? And try to fix that versus looking at the specific officer and then being like, the officer is completely at fault because he's probably done this like 20 times. It's probably a system of doing this and getting away with it, and the stress of this stupid job, et cetera, et cetera. It's probably like worker class problems.
Go ahead, Fanatic.
So, Todd Dolphin, you had made this statement that, like, that they can, like, SROs can have all sorts of benefits, like they can do dare and things like that. The thing is, SROs are not the
To be
ones.
clear, I wasn't saying that there are any benefits to SRs. I'm just saying there are probably better ways in which they could engage. I'm not, and like I use that
Okay.
example. I'm not saying that they. It seems like the data says like they're not very good.
Right. Okay. And just so we're clear, like DARE exists, and it's a program that exists in absence of SROs. It's typically not SROs that would be responsible for that. Like we already have resources for that. Like so that doesn't seem like another. I just want to make sure that we're not making arguments that would be beneficial for that SROs should be there, which doesn't seem like you were doing.
Oh,
DARE
well,
ends.
well, I don't know about Dare specifically. In my school, our SRO taught Dare.
Okay.
So,
Well,
but I'm not sure with the research of that. I don't like Dare anyways. Dare's a terrible program. But
yeah, Dare and his crackhead little sister, Sane. I don't. No one ever talks about that one. Remember that one, substance abuse, narcotics education? That was like kind of
Wow.
like paired with Dare. Both of them were terrible. They just really
I think
like
my
educated us
grandparents
about drugs.
still. I think my grandparents still have my Red Dare, little certificate or whatever you get for
Yeah.
completing Dare. I think they still have it in their home somewhere that I've got.
Boy, have you
Those
disappointed
motherfuckers
them.
the one thing I got really annoyed with Dare was when it was just this awful thing where they said they just lied to you about shit. Basically, they would just have
Yep.
spread misinformation and just lie to you about
Mhm.
stuff. And when I realized that
Specifically
they were
about
lying to
marijuana.
me, yeah, specifically about marijuana. Like they were just like, you think? I remember this woman said, "You think marijuana is good?" Well, and she just tells us an anecdote, a story about a woman who smoked weed and fell asleep and her baby fell and died in the tub. Shit, right? And it's like that's why marijuana is bad. And we're just like, even as high schoolers, we're just like, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, none of us knew what a logical fallacy literally was, but we were just like,
Sure.
that doesn't work at all. Like, what
Yeah.
are you talking about?
So for me, I remember Dare really was more in elementary school. The one thing that they gave me in elementary school that I've never forgotten was they were showing a person they had a person spin around in a circle for a long time, and then like they were like, okay, now we'll try to walk in a straight line, and they were like, that's what it's like to be driving while drunk. And I remember that standing out of my mind, like, wow, I guess yeah, if you really can't, like, because I never drank, obviously, and it's like, it seemed like that'd be really impossible. But overall, yeah, those programs were a complete smut. And then I wanted to say also, like, trying to like weigh, whenever you're trying to weigh adverse reactions versus something beneficial, then we probably need to be able to say that something beneficial is actually happening. So we obviously have all these adverse results from the presence of SROs, topped off and provided the exact number, which was 3.5% increase in all of these other problems, right? And so then we need to be able to say, well, what is the benefit that SRO provide in order to be able to say we can compare these two and say that maybe there's a balance? Like this is an unintended consequence, but it's a necessary one. Unfortunately, if our intention behind SROs is something such as violence prevention or even violence reduction, we would probably need to find some sort of data to suggest that violence prevention or reduction is actually there. Unfortunately, no such data exists to my knowledge. It seems like that they don't really provide any benefits as far as reduction in violence or whatever, so then their presence doesn't do anything aside from provide adverse results. And if that's the case, there's literally no justification for SROs.
So one thing the article did say was that so the one benefit that it states is that there's a study that found that students who interact with their SROs and like associate with them have like more like better feelings of safety. Now I'm not and I don't think that
Feels argument. I'm not criticizing you for it, but yeah. Like,
but
yeah,
I think that like I would even be on board for getting SROs, but at the same time I don't like the idea of like when violence happens in schools that teachers be in charge of it. And maybe it's just me, but
it
I've
wouldn't
seen
be. Wait. Within the absence of SROs, like all schools have security guards, non-SRO security guards. That like literally all of them have that. I don't know of a school in existence that doesn't have a security guard. Like again, you do have your SROs; they're there as well. But schools also have their independent security teams, and those people can be can be built with that. SROs received tremendous increases after Columbine. Do you think that before then that people were just not doing SROs whatsoever or no security whatsoever? Security guards have existed on campuses since my mother went to school. So the idea is we already did have things in place, and we are being the hyper reactive Americans that we are, reacted to this Columbine thing because children were present, and then decided to start doing something, which we now have data that suggests was incredibly ineffective. We tend to do this all the time. If you remember the Patriot Act, the way that came about was in response to 9/11. How atrocious has that been to American privacy, right? Like, we do these things on a regular basis. It's insane and asinine to me that we would recognize that we have this tendency and look in the clear face of data and say, wow, here's a problem, and not have any data to support any benefits to it, and would still say, I still like it. I'm sorry, well, Top Dolphin, you provided something. And apparently, children feel safer, which just makes sense. Within the presence of police officers, I can imagine children feel safer. I don't think their feeling of safer is beneficial enough to outweigh all of the adverse effects. But if you guys feel like their feelings are enough, then have at it. I don't really feel like that's worth convincing.
Yeah. So
I would
top.
also say I
Hold
would
on.
also make an
So
argument.
top.
I would say
One
what
one thing is that I don't think the vast majority of schools have security guards. My school definitely didn't. Before we had a SRO, most of our janitorial staff, they tried to find them in order to try and break up fights and stuff. I don't know, maybe there's a difference in bigger cities, but in the rural communities that I'm from, I don't think there's a single school in like a 50-mile radius when I was growing up that had some a such thing as security guard. It wasn't until they started to adopt SROs that a lot of us had any sort of like official capacity person that's looking to resolve conflict. That just didn't exist whatsoever.
Let's.
Yeah, and the so yeah,
In
I'm speaking.
middle,
I'm
high
really
school,
biased.
none of the
So
schools.
So
respond, and then we're gonna go to Jay, Chris, and Wiggle.
yeah, so yeah, let me. I'm really biased, but the one school that I went to that didn't have like an SRO, or we actually had some of them were actual like police officers stationed in the school that weren't SROs, because there's a difference. Um, but the one school I went to, like, yeah, it was the same thing. Like janitors and male teachers was the one resolving
Yeah,
conflict,
any
and
males that were
there,
available.
yeah,
Male,
and
if
there
there
was
was some male
so
teachers,
much, like, I just remember every time there was like a fight or something, teachers handled it like completely awfully. There was a teacher who like pulled the girl's hair. There were teachers who were like dragging kids around class. It was like atrocious. And every time, and like I said, anecdotal, every time a resource officer got involved or like a police officer got involved, it was usually like a lot better. Maybe it was just because the kids were too scared to like fight an officer, but they were like, fuck this, I'm gonna punch the teacher in the face. But like it was less, it was like, it seems like having some sort of authority on campus, and if it's security guards instead of SROs, I'd be down for that. It seems to be better than having teachers handle things.
Let's go to Jay, Chris, Wiggle.
Wiggle already said my point about parents and teachers coming together, because I think that's also like at least half of the problem. Like, sure, your kid may have behavioral, like something, there may be something going on with him, like this kid in the article, he had autism, but that's still no excuse, to put him in a chokehold. And I'm really curious to know if the officer even knew that, you know this kid had autism, and he was interacting with someone, and if he was even trained to interact with someone with autism. I doubt it. Like, but I'm sure, like, I can bet on it that both of those answers are no. But I guess my other point was that with security officers, right, with these SROs, like, is the money coming from? I'm always someone who looks at the finances, and if it's the Department of Education who's paying for them to be on campus, then why aren't they doing more to, make sure that these officers are appropriately trained, that they're involved in their community, that that they're actually doing their job? I did look at the salary. It's not it's really like not that much, but like it's like a teacher salary, but it's still like no excuse, because if you're taking this job, and let's say you're someone who, you've been on the force for like 7 or 8 years, and you take this job as like a side hustle, like, more power to you. But like, you're dealing with kids, right? Like, you're not dealing with adults, and coming into a campus with the same mentality that you have on the street as a beat cop is pretty problematic. um it I don't know. I'm not. I don't agree with the thought
That
that
makes
they
all
should
the
stay on
sense.
campus.
That makes all the sense, but just to throw the numbers out there, I guess not every school has it, but as of 2019, 75.4% of schools do. So the vast majority of schools have security officers. And the ones that don't, we probably should implement them having them. But clearly, SROs aren't providing anything of benefit. And to answer your question, Jay Cook, SROs are funded by the Department of Justice. That's how they're typically funded. Not all of them,
Really? Wow.
not all, but that's how they typically are funded.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking at an article by Politico, and in New York City, it's the Department of Education that funds them, and those employees come from in the NYPD, which is also another problematic thing. But considering stop and frisk and how terrible they are, but. Yeah, I guess that's all I had to say. And Dare did. My parents do have my Dare certificate, but yeah, that's the only thing that I still have from Dare that I kept. So those workbooks, they didn't do anything.
I'm gonna stop you from rolling a joint. Yeah. Did you use one of those pages? I fucking bet people did. Let's go, Chris.
Yeah, a lot of this people's like takes seem to be really like demographically like censored, like where are you from, is how you feel about the issue. And I can see like Gambit's situation with like being like in a southern rural town like that doesn't have a lot of resources. I can see these things like not having these things and like a lot of like having a lot of issues, but like having safety issues with like if you're in a low income area, there's gang violence and things like that. Here in like my city, there's parts of the city that were like that growing up, right? And those like schools that were in low income neighborhoods, they were run like prisons. That you had to go through metal detector going in. A lot of like you couldn't even have regular book bags. You had to wear clear book bags going into these places.
We had to wear clear book bags.
Yeah, so like I like the
Did we
school I
have
went
to in high
to.
school?
Yeah, the school I went to, it was really mixed race. Like it was in a mixed area. Um, it wasn't like there was issues, right? There were still fights. There was still like some gang related activity with some kids, like white and black. That's just the place in Ohio. It's just weird like that. It there's a lot of that stuff, but it wasn't so heavy that we needed officers in school. They were only called when necessarily, like when they were necessary to be there. As for what I remember growing up, it was all security guards. So I didn't have this fear of officers in school. I did witness one girl getting arrested when I was in middle school. And that was weird. That school was actually in a low income neighborhood, but it was actually a rebuilt school. And I was actually doing pretty well as like a school that they tore down and brought back for the neighborhood and they fixed it all up. I did remember witnessing one girl getting arrested, but it wasn't really a fight or anything like that. She wasn't getting held down or anything like that. They called her for some reason. That's the only time I've ever witnessed that. So like that's the reason why I come with the tech I can understand like from your perspective that being an issue and that being needed, and I can also see like in a sense of like fanatic in a case where like a lot of kids were like getting like spitefully like put through the prison system from these officers in certain places. Like if you have like a school system or just like officers coming in like who don't really know a lot of these kids, like they're more annoyed than anything. I can see them doing things like heckling kids, causing problems, right? Exacerbating problems. It's hard to like just give an answer for every single school around the country because like all these areas would be completely different and like the things that are needed to handle these situations are completely different. So I couldn't like give a black or white like or just a one answer statement for every.
Yeah, and that's what Wake the Beast brought up, right? Like living in the cities, there's more and more problems because of the disconnection of empathy. I think that was great. I mean, it's obvious.
I don't know. Actually, I want to push back on that. And then
Okay.
we'll also go to Wiggle. I'm forgetting about you, but I want to push back on that. Like that, it's necessarily knowing each other will solve that. First of all, like you have like acts of violence in small towns, small town cops, right? And shit can be vicious out there, right? And there's less eyes to even document any of that stuff. It's, I mean, so much of it is an act of control, right? You got these people like the business of policing is one where violence is condoned, right? Like it's legitimized in a way that's not legitimized almost anywhere else in our society, right? And so you got these motherfuckers who go out there who want to do it, who are looking for somebody, and it doesn't matter who it is. So I can't, like, I think it could certainly be helpful. It could certainly be helpful in certain situations, right? Well, people will give you the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe like, you know what? Maybe I'll call your father, right? You like fucking trespass or some shit, right? Maybe before hauling you in, I'll call your father, have a talk with him. You know, we usually have beers together, things like that, sure, right? But like the violence that I think we're talking about isn't like is officers like having the ability to wield force and having an unchecked ability to wield force, constantly being given the green light by society in general. So I don't think that, you know, oh, just because I know Officer Bob, that'll, you know, save us. I don't know.
Yeah, to like back up that, like, how many, I don't know about you guys, I've heard so many stories from like especially women who'll be like, yeah, like this really bad thing happened to me from my ex-boyfriend, but my ex-boyfriend's dad a cop, right? And like because he has such a close tie to this, like, or my ex-person's boyfriend's like friends with a cop, and because there's so many really really close ties that like I can't like hold people accountable because people are friends with people.
Yeah,
I don't like buy into this idea that like that, and like I don't know, because I've heard there's data out there. I haven't seen any of it. Maybe I should go looking. But I haven't seen the data that like um cops being like in an area or like knowing the people in an area is like better.
it's crazy because Top Dolphin, that's exactly one of the problems. Is for the longest, I remember I used to argue that police needed to be people that are directly related to the communities that they're policing because it would obviously be more beneficial because they're more like affiliated with the culture and understanding, and so it would create better results. I thought that for so many years, and then the data actually came out, and it's not the case. But partially that's because, of course, if you start restricting the hiring of your police force specifically to officers from an in group, then that means now that you might have worse officers or worse candidates because now you're having to be significantly more selective. And so it doesn't seem like it actually leads to better results, despite the fact that I think all of us can reasonably assume it makes our intuitively guess that it would create better results just because of that. Furthermore, I don't know that there's any difference between like the presence of SROs in a rural community versus like a city versus a freaking suburb. To be honest, again, all the data that I've seen suggests that in general these things are worse. Unless we have data that specifically suggests that it is better in rural communities, I think that we should probably assume it is bad, just like it is everywhere else, because I think rural communities were also embedded in that data. Clearly, they weren't enough to offset these other problematic issues, adverse results from the presence of SROs. I'm going to keep using that, Jay Cook. You gave me that.
What wiggle?
Yeah, I was gonna stress once again that like the instance that was brought up earlier was like a 7-year-old, and in this story it's like a 5-year-old. Like that's really bad. Like we're not talking about like 18. Like these are the ages where like even pedophiles are like, how can you do that to kids? Like, you know, those are kids, you know. But it's like a really young group of people. These are people that are like the trick-or-treaters. Like those are young kids that this guy's putting in a chokehold. But like outside of that, like Top Dolphin was mentioning something about like the feelings of the kids feeling safe and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but there's also the element of like the parent, you know, what the parent feels, etc. Because it's like I think about like the instances that GSU Gambit's talking about, and then it brings to light exactly what Chris Cosmo was talking about. It's like me and Gambit lived in completely different circumstances. And when he's describing like how he felt at his school or what have you on this panel, I completely different experience. Like I had like a more privileged experience, and like when I think of like my school and I think of like high school, I think like yeah, no, like we would have loved to not have any sort of like security because like there was this feeling of safety, and it was the idea that like we wanted bad shit to happen because that was exciting. Like you wanted fights, you didn't want the
True.
security guard to break something up. Like kids in my school, like you wanted to go viral, you wanted to like fuck in the bathroom and smoke weed in open areas. Everything was about doing something and getting away with it and letting everybody know you did that. It was like everybody was always trying to go viral and do something crazy, and I was there for the ride. Like I wanted to experience all those events. And when you saw a security guard, it was kind of just like this grim reaper of fun, walking around and like ending things early. And that was my experience. And then you hear some of the stories of the people on the panel, and I'm like, damn, like they're talking about like these people saved a teacher from getting like beat up by a kid. That's still
Yeah,
funny.
that-
That's a
dude,
soft ass teacher, but still like
dude,
getting
like,
beat up by a kid. And I'm like,
bro.
yeah,
I was the kid. I was
Wait,
not beating up teacher.
it
Okay,
explains.
no,
that's a very long story. Maybe another day, but like I'm just be clear. I wasn't out here like beating up teachers. Okay. Although
I
my
remember a
record
time a
might say
teacher
it was.
but
overreacted.
just to
I remember a time a school
ju-
overreacted. Oh, yeah.
no,
I'm going down
wait,
memory lane this whole panel. Okay.
so what?
Yeah, that's just.
I was saying that there
Go
was.
ahead.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
I was saying that there was one time when I was in the kindergarten. The first time I ever got suspended in kindergarten. Okay, and it was because this young girl kept like poking me or whatever. She kept like fucking with me, okay, and she kept like
You
messing with me.
beat women?
And I was like, now
No.
listen, I was a kid. Like I was a kid, right? And I don't know the things I'm saying. I said, you touch me again, I'll stab you in the eye with this pencil. Okay, I threatened her. I said I was gonna do that or something like that, right? She told the teacher, and the teacher had a whole ass fit. She looked at me like I was the fucking devil. Like, what is wrong with you and all this sort of stuff. And I got suspended. And I was like, damn, I felt so bad. I was like, my goodness. But I was like 5, you know? It was like, Jesus Christ.
I feel like that's like
Yeah.
a free
Yeah, so,
speech thing, you know? Like you should
wow.
be able
Wow.
I was
So
just expressing my Sigma
teachers.
male
It's a
rage.
gateway,
That was
yeah,
man. It's
I
a
want to try
gateway.
to put some of this stuff in perspective because, like, there's vastly different parts of the U.S. So, I'm from a rural area. There's a city, somewhat close by, so I don't dox myself. Somewhat close by, named Albany, Georgia, and a lot of people who've been to Georgia have heard of Albany, Georgia, because there's a HBCU there called Albany State University, dopest HBCU out. But in 1998, which is the year I was born, Albany, Georgia was ranked the murder capital of the US. So to be the murder capital of the US, you have to have the highest murder per capita. Albany, Georgia had 90,000 people. It was competing with all of these other places that are massively more populated, and it was murder capital of the world. And the gang culture and everything that came with it persisted after that time. Like I like in like my city wasn't as bad as their city. We had like the fake people who wanted to be living the life that those people live. And like certain parts of the US are just drastically different. And it's hard in conversations like this to try to explain to people that haven't lived in these circumstances what it's like to live in a place where you're like very close to murder capital of the world and the type of danger that a lot of students or teachers or blah 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 is in. Like a lot of these things are just necessary. Like to people that are from my community, there's not a question of whether these things are necessary. It's more so just like duh.
Go ahead. Did you have? I'm not sure if you had your hand up, Blake. If you did, I wasn't trying to ignore you. I wasn't sure. I thought you were like stroking your chin. But wait,
Okay.
please.
Yep. I think a situation like this reveals really a spiritual crisis that Americans are in, or more of a crisis of social norms. Because on one hand, there is a social norm in America that says it's reprehensible to put your hands on a person who does not present a direct threat to your life. And most certainly, we expect police officers to abide by this, especially when it comes to dealing with vulnerable persons like children. But on the other hand, inside of our homes, 54% of fathers feel that the use of violence on children is absolutely necessary in order to produce a strong adult. So, what's exposed here is a bit of an inconsistency. If we are agreed that violence is an effective teaching method on children, if it's good enough to use in the home, then why can't the rest of society whoop your child's ass? But if we're saying that it is not a good thing, then our position on the stand should be the same. But I just want to push back against this assumption that police officers or policing in itself prevents violence. If anyone here is laboring under the apprehension that the presence of police officers prevent violence, I just want to share some information with you. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation published the study on Thursday in the medical journal The Lancet, having compared data from the U.S. National Vital Statistics System, which provides data on births and deaths in the United States, to 3 open-source non-governmental databases on fatal police shootings. According to the study, between 1980 and 2018, there were about 30,000 deaths from police violence across the country. On average, that's the equivalent of 2 people in the US killed by police officers every day. But more than half of the total deaths, 55%, were not reported. This means there is a culture of underreporting the true impact of police violence. 55% of police-inflicted deaths are misclassified as something else. And can you guess which demographic in America was most greatly misrepresented? I think you know already. It's you. It's me. It's your son. It's my son. What does this mean? It means that we really don't know how safe policing is. And until we know, police officers should not be around our children unsupervised.
Damn.
Absolutely.
I'm muted. Listen, Wake, I want to say I absolutely love you for that. I think that's great. I'm going to read those studies myself. That's a humongous talking point that I definitely need to add into my arsenal. And I think it should inform our thinking even more so. Regarding the spanking thing, though, I do think that I think there's plenty of things that you would say are or that are appropriate for a parent to do with the child that would not be appropriate for other people to do for a child. I think within like that specific dynamic, there might be presence of something like I guess the fact that you care for your child and you demonstrate that you love that you love your child on a regular basis, caring for them through all the positive affirmation. That the presence of something like spanking doesn't immediately carry with it the same ills and problems that would be in the presence of like from like I don't know, a teacher or something. Teacher doesn't necessarily you can't be guaranteed that your teacher loves your child as much as a parent should, right? And I think that all of that, those like this predisposition towards doing something out of love from a parent is going to be drastically different. Not that it's always there, by the way, but it's going to be drastically different than I would have towards a teacher, a principal, or anyone else. So while I again think like spanking should be super duper minority of situations, absolutely a last resort. I think that you should probably try as many non-violent ways of doing it as you can. We've kind of had a previous debate on like spanking in general. I would say even though I might make some concessions on parental corporal punishment, I think there's never any way that I would ever say that this would be the equivalent from some non-parental, non-familial figure.
I think an issue here is a more general question. It's a principle. Does violence work as a method of education? Can people be made better by the introduction of violence?
I think in general, I would probably say no, but just really quickly, I would say, for example, like popping someone's hand that's about to touch a stove, like a 3-year-old, that's violent. And I think it's incredibly resourceful and I think it's beneficial. And I would say it would be a very good instruction tool.
Fanatic, I actually think that the best way to do that, instead of popping their hand, is to let them touch the stove.
Exactly what I said to someone. Yes.
Just no.
I'm not entertaining this.
It won't-
I'm not.
it won't-
I'm sorry. I love y'all, but I
really
can't.
going
That's
to say, because like
do it
it's
again.
fine if it's
They
a
won't do
stove
it
and you
again.
get like a little blister on your
This is
finger. But if
insane.
it's a car and they walk onto the street and they die, like obviously
Obviously.
he's using an
Yes.
innocuous example. But like these are not like
No,
you got.
I need
You
to
gotta
know.
I hope you
obviously a
sit
stove's
there
not that
and
bad,
enjoy
but
it.
like a car or like
I hope
a
you
knife
sit
is
there
like a completely different thing.
smiling
Holy
as you
shit.
know what will
is it.
happen to that young kid. I hope you sit there
Let them
with
touch
joy
it.
on your face,
That's what-
awaiting the kid being hurt.
That's what my
You
parents
sick
did to me. That's what
fucks.
my mother says. She watched me reach out. And I vaguely remember this. Watch me reach out and grabbed it.
You know,
It was the last
Childless,
time.
you childless
What?
fuck.
There's
do
a
it.
third option.
You won't
There's
do
a
it.
third option.
Go ahead.
We can give our children the benefit of the doubt that they are capable of learning, and we can speak to them. See, what I do with my son when he's doing something or about to do something I don't want is I say, son, why are you doing that? And he uses his 4-year-old mind to tell me to the best of his ability, what he's doing. And when he's finished, I tell him the consequences of that. And more often than not, he looks at me and he says, okay, daddy, and he stops. And this is what I wish I could do, because I think in a way, Black children are the greatest, are more at risk than other groups of violence. And what I really wish I could do is I could take all the Black boys and all the Black girls in America, and I can sit them down and I can look them in the eyes and I can say, you're beautiful. Nothing is wrong with you. You are strong. You can do good things. And I wonder what sort of results that would present just to have little Black kids hear that for the first time without the assumption that they're dangerous.
Wait, we can advocate for that and understand that there are going to be extenuating circumstances in which maybe that isn't working and you need to do something else, right? Like we can all say, hey, we prefer that you talk to your kids first, right? I think everyone in this panel, nobody would say let's immediately jump to violence, right? But there are certain situations the kid is walking in front of a car and they aren't willing to listen to you. Like there's certain situations where like you have to either restrain them or like touching the stove thing, I think is ridiculous to let them touch it. So in
So
those terms, you might have to pop a hand or blah blah blah.
I
Like
just want to express, thank you, Mr. Gambit, but I just want to express a bit of another inconsistency in our culture. Let's remove the child from that situation and put a woman. What if your wife was about to walk in front of a truck? Would it be appropriate to strike her?
wait, I didn't say strike in the case of the car. I said restrain and pull. I would do the same thing.
Sure, but under what extenuating circumstances would it be acceptable to strike anyone other than a child? It seems as if we only apply this rule when it comes to children. And I don't
So
think
I
it's a
think
coincidence that children are the only group that can't advocate for themselves.
wait,
And I
wait,
think that's why they, go ahead.
I think we socialize adults so they won't do things such as like randomly touch a hot stove. I don't know what I would do if my girl started randomly touching hot stoves. Maybe I would pop her hand. I don't think I think we've socialized, hopefully, we've socialized people out of those type of behaviors by the time they're adults.
And to be clear, not all physical like intervention is like spanking, right? So
Well,
like
for
if your
sure.
kid is running out into a street and you like pick them up so they don't run out into the street, that is not the same as like striking a kid's hand when he touches a hot stove, right?
Talking about uses of violence.
Sure.
Yeah, but like one, yeah. So but like these things, I don't know if you would call both of them violence. I wouldn't.
No,
No,
I
but
wouldn't
it'd
call
be-
him. I wouldn't call
Yeah.
embracing a child violent, but striking a child is definitely violence.
Absolutely, but I would say for one, I don't think that we would be able to compare like adults to children. And here's the reason: as an adult, I can use my words with the full expectation that my wife is going to be completely able to comprehend exactly what I'm saying, such that the idea can be made very crystal clear that she should not be touching the stove. However, trying to communicate with my words to my 9-month-old to stay away or not to touch the stove, or my 1-year-old or 2-year-old. There's plenty of times where a very, very young child is not going to be able to fully grasp the words and needs to just be obedient. And if you see a particularly rebellious child in those scenarios that's going to do something that's incredibly harmful, and it seems that words aren't effective, and he's doing something that is probably egregious enough that he can result in like great bodily harm or death or whatever, like running out into the street repeatedly after being told consistently or being grounded or something. I think in those sort of situations, I think a light pop ought to do the trick. Mary Poppins.
But wait,
All
but
right,
the,
so
so
hold on.
there's plenty of
I
ways you
think
can
there's-
intervene. No. I'm talking. Okay, there's plenty of ways
Okay.
you can intervene without necessarily like inflicting pain. Because like what like the research shows is that like any like whenever you inflict pain, you are right in one thing is that you create children who are scared and obedient rather than children who are empathetic and make more moral decisions. And yeah, like when a kid reaches for a stove, you can simply move their hand away from the stove and say, "Don't touch that." Right? You don't have to like hit the kid. You don't have to like cause pain in
Sure,
order
you
for
could
them
say
to fear
no.
the stove,
Yeah,
right?
but what happens if the child does it incessantly, despite the fact that you've said no repeatedly?
Let them touch though.
I'm not entertaining that. I'm sorry.
I mean,
But, okay,
you remove,
listen,
you
just,
remove them
like-
from the situation, right? Like,
Wait, hold on.
if you let 'em do
Sig,
it,
you
Sig,
don't let them in the kitchen per se.
I
Right?
got you. But Sig, just to be really clear here, I hope you understand that what you're suggesting is violent. If you, through inaction, allow your child to be harmed, knowing that they are going to irrevocably receive harm, that is violent as well, right?
Fanatic, I would tell them, no, Fanatic. I would tell them it's hot and that you shouldn't do it because you get hurt. But if they don't listen, like I'm never gonna be in
I
a
understand
situation.
what you're
I
saying.
don't want to be in a situation. I don't want to
Can
be in
you
a situation where
engage?
it's like,
Can you engage with what I just said, though?
engage what you just said, that this is violent.
Yes.
Oh man.
If by
my definition of
inaction
violent.
you don't do anything, I'm sorry, if by inaction you allow your child to do something that will irrevocably result in harm to him, then that would be violent as well.
I suppose I'd have to say yes. I guess that's one of
Okay.
those exact.
So I guess you
I
are
would have
okay
to
with
say that's
violence, but
acceptable.
right? So
I
you
would-
feel like
I disagree.
you feel like inaction violence is okay, but action violence is not okay.
In certain circumstances, yeah, because like okay, with action violence and something like that, you become like, what if someone beats, like what's happened to me a lot, I'm sure a lot of you, someone gets beat with a belt or a slipper or a fucking switch or whatever the fuck, okay, that's an act of, I don't know, terror in something. That's saying like, hey, if you don't do the right thing, I'm going to actively beat you. It's very different from just like, hey, you've learned a lesson now, okay, you're not going to do it anymore. All
So
right,
I have a
like,
question.
Neglect,
Sig.
neglect
Sig,
violence is
I don't know.
okay.
You so like
no,
a really
neglect
good
violence.
example-
Oh, you
Yeah,
just
that's
came
what
up, you
that
came up with a whole
is.
new term here. Neglect
sure.
violence.
Yeah,
I was
like,
like, what?
I did. It is a new term. I feel like I already
Yeah.
said inactive violence, and I feel like that's a
You
good thing.
did.
But basically, yes, I did like throw in an extra term, which is basically yes. I would say to fail to protect your child is by the very definition of the word neglect. And so, if you're choosing to abstain from preventing your child from harming themselves, that is literally neglect. And so,
But
I would say that
there are certain
Well,
things.
there are like levels
Fanatic,
of
hold
harm
on.
and
There are
stuff like
certain
that,
things. I
right?
think that
sure,
there was a
just like there's
commenter.
levels
There was a
of harm
commenter
versus
that.
the popping versus
Well,
like the little tap on the
so
chin.
Sig,
There was
if
a,
your
there was a
kid,
commenter that actually said, hold on, no, there was a commenter that was actually saying something that's just like, kids are very intelligent. The vast majority are very intelligent. They lack experience. Okay, and that's really how a lot of this stuff works with your kid. You're just learning things, all sorts of things as to what happens. And sometimes experience is just the best thing to get someone to actually. No, I'm sorry. In all times, experience is the best time to learn something. It's the best way to learn anything
Hold
in your
on.
life.
I
All
want
right.
to push back on that a little bit. I have a question. Sig.
What?
Say there's
Okay.
say there's like a vat of acid. You don't know. Like let's go with the power socket,
Yeah.
right? You have a kid with like
Okay,
say
they-
the-
Bad of
let's say
acid. Sorry.
I'm not gonna go down that extreme. Like why would it be a vat of acid near a kid? All right, but like say there's a power socket and like there's a kid with a fork and they're playing around with the socket, right? And like, what do you do in that situation? There's a good chance they might just
This
die.
is Yeah, this
Right?
is
There's no
analogous to
way.
like this is analogous to them just nearly getting hit by a car like, running out into the street, right? Okay, if obviously I'm gonna be like, no, fucking stop that. That's always the first thing you should do. Let me be very clear. That's always the first thing
We all
you should
agreed
do. We
on
were
that.
talking about
Yeah,
a kid. Yeah, we were talking about a kid that was incessantly trying to do a certain thing with a socket analogy. If they keep doing it, I guess I would have to just like show them what happens to people, not show them like literally in real life, but show them what happens to people that get electrocuted. Okay,
What
or
if they still
something.
wanna do
All
it?
right, just be, huh?
what
Like,
you're
hey, I
assuming
want to
that that'll
die.
stop-
Like suicidal, or just, I'd be like, hey, you could actually die. Okay.
Well, couldn't you
die.
also though like? Oh, sorry, Sig.
Yeah, I would have to explain the danger that they'd be putting themselves in by
To a
doing that
1-year-old.
sort of thing, assuming they would
A
do it.
1-year-old.
And okay, if they're a 1-year-old, in that case, I'm buying those fucking things they do, those things for the sockets. Then
They
I'm buying
pull it
those
out.
fucking things you put on the sockets, and I'm covering. They
They
pull it
pull
out.
those out.
Oh, holy, they pull those out.
Number
Oh,
one, you
God
just
damn.
don't.
No,
let
they
them
do. I'm
have
telling you from
forks.
experience.
Like,
This
it's-
isn't. I'm not.
Don't let them
making
have
this
forks.
up.
I mean, that's a thing. I would have to just be there at all times. Then I mean, oh, hold on. Okay, a 1-year-old
You're
wouldn't
setting
understand.
up such an
Wait, Gambit,
Yeah, I want
if you
you
pop
to-
their hand. Wait, I'm just saying. But if you pop that 1-year-old's hand, they wouldn't get that either. They would probably still try to fuck with the
My
socket
kids
anyway.
have
I mean,
successfully
regardless.
made it through.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Like, at that point, if they're that young, they're just gonna still do it. So you have to do a lot. You just have to
no,
watch
they
them at all
don't.
times.
No, they learn when you pop their hand.
If you pop their
They
hand,
learn.
I was
oh,
muted,
if you pop
but-
their hand, they'll definitely learn. They'll
This
just-
is a stupid
Sure.
thing, man. Like you're assuming that like kids are like intelligent. All right, if we go with that, then like, all right, they're gonna do that shit anyway if you stop them if they want to do it. They're gonna find a way to do it, and then you're not around, and they'll learn their lesson. So why would you, as a parent, while you're there, not try your best to stop harm on your kid? Like if
Exactly.
they're gonna want to do it
Stop harm
again
by
later.
inflicting harm. Like the
No,
so,
don't give
like,
me that
by
shit.
the way,
Burning?
Hands is not-
popping
because
someone's
let's
hand?
be very, very clear. When you pop a
Weren't you
kid's
the one
hand, right?
advocating for like
the
police in
goal
schools?
in that
Because
action,
of it?
right? Hold
Come
on. No.
son.
The goal in the action of popping the kid's hand is literally to inflict some amount of pain on the child.
All right.
Preferably less.
Let's
Preferably less than
hold
the
their
pain they will
hand.
feel from the
Hold
actual
their
action.
hand
Right?
and
Right?
move it away. All right. You hold their hand
shit.
and you
Like,
move
but
it around.
That's different. That's different, right?
Yeah,
We've already
okay. So then
established
you do
okay?
that. You do that. Why would you let them?
Okay, but
Why would you let their hand be
Are
on
we
a
missing
stove?
like, the preventive behavior? Like, why do you have, as an adult, like, why aren't you thinking like 2 steps
Wait,
ahead?
wait, wait.
If you know your kid is gonna touch the stove, right? Why don't you
We'll have them in
turn
the
off the
kitchen.
stove before they, like?
So
Is there one day gonna learn how to turn the stove on?
When they're older and they can understand.
So look,
Right?
look.
Like,
Yeah.
eventually they understand, right?
My 3-year-old son
Then
knows
teach them
turn
how
the
to
stove on.
cook. Like teach them how to cook. All right.
It's
You
a
can-
knob.
Yeah,
It's
you
a knob.
supervise it, and you don't let them in the fucking kitchen.
But,
Like, this is
but it's look, it's this like it's really simple. Like people think like we're suggesting that they like put their whole hand in the fire or some shit like that,
Yeah,
right? Like we
yeah,
cook
some
their
dumb
hand.
shit.
Yeah,
That's
right.
some-
Like look,
some
if my
Y'all might
kid,
would if you
my
had a camp
kid
out.
is
If you had a
about
camp out and they
to,
wanted to put their hands in the fire, would you stop them?
if my kid is about to like power bomb right off the top rope into flames, yeah, I'm gonna catch them. It's like, all right, maybe this isn't it, right? But they're just reaching and they're gonna like touch the metal, right? And like get like a little burn in the hand. All right. It's like, don't do it. Don't. It's gonna do it. All right. Well, there you go.
So, yeah.
There you
Wait.
go.
There's
I'm
a
telling
so,
you, buddy.
so to be
Hold
clear,
on,
there's like I hate
Hold
this
on,
idea
Brian.
that Gambit like kind of said. I mean, Fanatic said, and not that Fanatic's necessarily wrong. But like there's something that he kind of like ignores. And I'm not saying you did this intentionally, but when like for example, a kid touching like a hot stove or a kid falling and skinning their knee, these are like okay experiences that kids can go through. And there's actually like a really cool like parenting model that like talks about this. I think it's called the Little Tinkerer model. I can't remember who proposed it, but I took a class on this. There's a where like the goal of the parents is to be like a safe haven for kids, and so kids basically go to their parent, they recharge their social stamina or like energy, and then they go out into the world and they tinker with the world and they experience things. And what the parent should do is they should be there so that when the kid has like a bad experience, they're a place where that the kid can go for comfort and to be consoled. So like certain types of things like touching a stove, like if your finger is touching like a pot, or like skinning your knee on the ground, these are like innocuous things that aren't gonna like harm that aren't gonna like largely affect the overall safety of a child. That letting these kids go through these things is okay, because it allows them to like experience the world and like test around with things. Now obviously like things that are like a lot worse, like jumping off the top ropes into a fire or going to like these represent a threat, and like the best thing to do is like to remove the kid from that situation. But like never is it like okay to like inflict pain on a child. It just doesn't, like the data shows that all it does is create obedient children who just like they don't, the difference is they don't like try to like hold moral values and like like to follow rules or anything like that. What they do is they just end up waiting till the parent's not around and then do the bad thing without a parent to help console them and like protect them.
Okay. Why don't we? I want to give Wake the last word on this before we move on to our next topic. But Wake, just for the future, if you could palms out to the camera, it makes it easier for me to see you, right? Alpha palms. All right, go ahead.
I think it would help to talk about what's going on inside of your child. This is an area in which strength and power doesn't really help you. And that's difficult sometimes as men to realize. We have all this strength, all this power, but when it comes to children and women, these tools don't help us deal with these relationships. Think about how frustrating it is to be a child. Your brain is developing. The machinery that adults have that helps them remember complicated steps and details, like go to the bathroom and brush your teeth, you don't have that yet. And being spanked and struck does not accelerate the process of brain growth. If anything, it retards it. And what specialists, whose job it is to study how spanking impacts children, have been telling us this for the better part of 3 decades, that if you hit your child, you are literally giving them brain damage, lowering their IQ scores and making the problem worse. And what this does is it encourages children to use violence in their own interpersonal relationships. So by spanking your child, not only are you encouraging them to use violence against other children, but this pays dividends in future relationships. What happens when I have a disagreement with my wife? What do I do now? When I disobeyed my parents, they loved me. What did they do? Well, maybe it's appropriate under certain circumstances to show love by means of violence. So if you are spanking your children, I hope you will stop. You are literally retarding their growth and damaging the matter in their brain. And if you have been beaten by your parents, I'm sorry that happened to you. It happened to me too. But a part of being an adult is coming to realize where our parents failed us, where they succeeded, taking that good, adding our own experiences, and becoming better people in the process.